Joining me now is James Kennedy, a scout for OHL Central Scouting. And James, can you give me a sense of what you do before the draft, all the work that goes in behind the scenes to evaluate these players?
Well, starting in basically early September, we all head out to the Toronto Titans tournament. We get our lists of players that are going to be playing for the certain teams. Our Bantam scout in the prior year will do some scouting and give us some future prospects or some players that we want to look for early on in the year. And then throughout the year, we identify players for all 20 teams. We write reports on them, and then the teams are given those lists and reports throughout the year, and then they decide what they want to do with them. Our job is continue to scout these players and go to games and go to all the major tournaments. I think in a given year I'll go to 7 or 8 tournaments, attend a few hundred games. So what we do is we're kind of an eye in the sky for all 20 teams, and essentially we do work for all 20 teams.
So, for you, James, when you're evaluating a player, what is it that you're looking for? And specifically, what things do you think will make them successful in that jump to the next level?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we're looking to see if these players, or if we feel these players can play at the next level, and that's what all 20 teams are looking for. Essentially, what I like is I like smarts, I like skill, and then in today's game, skating is an important thing. So those are the three things I look for: skating, skill, and then smarts. And I coached for a number of years at the AAA level, so I think that's kind of helped me in evaluating players.
So, coming into this year's draft, how did you feel about the talent level available this year, and especially in your region, the Alliance region?
Yeah, the Alliance region's pretty good. There were some teams last year that I watched during the playoffs, so their major Bantam year. Elgin, Waterloo was usually a strong team too. London had some top end players, so I knew there'd be a number of players that would get drafted. And at the end of the day, we actually had 50 drafted, which is the highest that I've seen since I've been doing this for the past 4 years. So it was a good year for the Alliance. Good skilled hockey teams, good skilled hockey players. So it was a lot of fun to go to games. And that's the one thing about scouting. When you go to a game, you want to see good hockey, and there was a lot of good hockey. And I live in London, so I had the Junior Knights here, which were a pretty good team, and then the Elgin team, which was the best in the Alliance. So I got to see them play a number of times, which is a lot of fun.
So, some good things for OHL fans to look forward to.
Definitely, yes, yes.
When you look at the Guelph Storm's draft, do you like what they did this year and who they were able to target?
Yeah, I like what they did. Their first round pick, the captain out of Whitby, a good two-way forward, good skating, good skill set, a hard-nosed player, does a lot of things well. Their first second round draft pick was the defenseman of the Junior Canadians. Again, another good skilled defenseman that can skate, can move the puck well. And I think they drafted 5 players out of the Alliance this year, and they drafted a couple defensemen out of the Alliance. Ethan Coops was the second one they picked, and then Keenan Taves out of Sun County. Now, he didn't play on a very good Sun County team, but when you went out to watch him, you really noticed him because he's a good skating, physical, good-sized defenseman that can really move the puck well. Same with the Coops kid out of Huron Perth. It's another 6'1", 6'2" defenseman. So I think George Burnett and company did a really good job with their draft this year. They got some players from the Alliance later in the draft too, some good grinding forwards. A kid out of Waterloo by the last name of Carson. Not the biggest player, but he really grinds and works hard and competes hard. So I think a lot of the players that I noticed that they drafted were good two-way players that compete really hard.
One player I wanted to mention was Jake Carabella, who Guelph selected in the second round. He's a local player, Guelph native. Do you like it when teams select a local player, or do you find that sometimes teams fall in love with players who they get to see more often?
You know, being from London, and you watch what the Hunters do, and teams like that and successful teams like that, I don't think they really fall in love with players in their area. Obviously, I'm sure the GM and the coaches and all the scouts are getting to see the local players more than anybody. But I can't see that. There's too much at stake nowadays. I noticed teams like London. Last year London didn't draft any local players. They're looking for the best players, and I think with George Burnett being in this game for as long as he has been, I can't see him doing that. I know when he was down in Flint, he would never just draft an American player just because they were down in that area. I think if they're drafting a local player, they do feel that he has got the prospect or the possibility of playing in the league one day.
Are there other Alliance region players who you think might have been steals in this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, every year there's players that you watch get drafted, like, oh geez, like I think the Coops kid out of here on Perth, I know I've talked about him a bit. I think he went pretty low. I think that's a player that probably could have went late in the second, early in the third. So I think it's a very good value pick. And again, there's players, there's a kid Finley out of Windsor who was a defenseman who was actually converted from forward to defenseman, and he didn't get drafted at all. And I think that's a player that potentially could walk onto a team at some point, And again, he's a Windsor player, so you'd have to think that maybe he'd get an opportunity to try out for Windsor. But again, there's always players that go a little bit later than what they should have, and there's always players that sometimes you look at, geez, he went a little bit high. But again, it's what the teams prefer, and it's what the scouts were looking for at the time, and that thing kind of happens.
Thanks so much for joining me here today, James.
No problem.